Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Parton. I'm the Director of Loss Control here at Kentucky League of Cities, and I just want to welcome everyone for attending this HELP webinar on defensive driving. The prevention of vehicle accidents has been and continues to be the focus of the Loss Control Department here at KLC. And as your member-owned insurance program, as we come to an end of 2021, we've received 2,871 claims involving auto accidents, and this has resulted in an incurred cost of over $3.8 million. I promise you that you will learn something this morning during this webinar. We're just asking that you take this information and everything that you learn and apply it to your own driving methods. This may include changing some habits and creating new habits. But this webinar is being recorded. Everyone will receive a copy after the presentation, along with a copy of the slides being used. Share this information with your coworkers, your family, your friends. We all share the road together, so it would behoove all of us to educate, familiarize ourselves with the information you'll receive this morning. There are Q&A functions. If you have questions, you can type your question in the Q&A function. You can also use the chat function, but the chat is, everyone can see that, whereas the Q&A is kept more of a privately. You can also raise your hand during the webinar if you want to ask Rob a question specifically. We can unmute you, bring you to the screen if you need to do that. But without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker. We have the privilege of having Rob Miller with us today. He has over 39 years of investigative experience. He is retired from the Kentucky State Police at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2004 as the Director of the Technical Services Division. He previously served as coordinator of the Traffic Accident Reconstruction Program and initiated and directed the development of the regional reconstruction teams. During his tenure as the coordinator, the Kentucky State Police were recognized as having one of the top 6 accident reconstruction programs in the United States. While assigned to the academy, he taught firearms, defensive tactics, and emergency and pursuit driving. He also served as the cadet strength coach. Rob has investigated or reconstructed over 3,000 motor vehicle crashes and many complex criminal cases. He lectures nationally and internationally on reconstruction, police supervision, pursuit and emergency driving, policy, and the use of force. He is recognized as the expert in both state and federal courts. Rob, we thank you for coming today and sharing the information.
I hope that everyone can hear me and everyone can see my PowerPoint presentation. It's an honor to be here with you today and chat with you. I'm technologically challenged with Zoom, so you're going to have to bear with me for just a second. My PowerPoint is at the end instead of the beginning, so I apologize for that. But basically, we're here to talk about defensive driving skills, and the focus of this is going to be on policy and driving habits. Those are the 2 things that will keep you safe and keep your loss records down and keep you from being sued. I've got a lot of experience doing this, as you see, and have heard from Greg. I won't talk about that very much other than to say that I don't want to brag, but I know what I'm talking about. So when we look at drivers in not only police cars and ambulances and fire trucks, but also sanitation trucks and public works vehicles, we have to have the person have the right attitude. They have to be attuned to hazards. They have to drive like a professional, because that's the standard they're held to when lawsuits occur. One thing I think that we need to remember is that good driving means caution and control, and that it can happen to anybody. This morning in Carroll County, where I am at today, the roads are covered with black ice, and travel is restricted to about 20 miles an hour once you get outside the city on Kentucky 55 and some of the county roads. It's treacherous driving. So mentioning that to your workers before they go out in the morning could save somebody from having an accident. These wrecks are horrendous. They involve big vehicles many times. They involve catastrophic injuries and catastrophic lawsuits. And this is not something that you want either your city or your agency to be a part of if you can help it. We help it by instituting policy and then following that policy. The worst thing about policy is having it and not following it. I guess the only thing worse would be not having a policy at all and just let everybody drive like they wanted to. We have to start from the basic premise that that most of these drivers have not had formal driver education training. Uncle Joe, Aunt Susie may have taught them how to drive, and maybe they were good teachers, and maybe they weren't. So my suggestion to you is, from a city standpoint, is to start everybody out with some basic things. We talk about the KRS and following the rules of the road. We talk about following distances. It's one of the big things. We have people that tailgate. We have people that involve cell phones in their everyday life totally and constantly. And if you're, using a cell phone, it's not as when you're going to have a wreck, it's how bad it's going to be when you do have that wreck. So those are things that we need to really put into people's brains and constantly remind them about the dangers of texting and driving, and sometimes even talking and driving. If you text and drive, your perception and reaction time, in other words, the time it takes you to see a hazard and begin to react to it, is about 3 seconds slower than a normal driver that's paying attention to the road. 3 seconds is a lot of time, and we cover a lot of distance. At 60 miles an hour, you're going to cover about 270 feet, the length of a football field, while you're looking at your phone. And so I always ask my police officers when I teach the class, how many of you all would drive down the middle lane of the Waterston Expressway in rush hour traffic at 60 miles an hour with your eyes closed for 3 seconds? And everybody says, well, that's crazy, I wouldn't do it. Well, that's exactly what you're doing when you're texting and driving. And so educating your drivers about texting is key to this whole thing. We have to remember and have to talk about what happens 6 months after the collision, because that's when the driver gets the lawsuit handed to them. That's when you as the supervisor get a lawsuit handed to them. That's when you as the city manager or the mayor or part of the city council gets added to that lawsuit, because they're going to get to all of you. They use the driver to start with, but these plaintiffs' attorneys will include all of you all in supervision rows in the lawsuit, because that's how they get to your deep pockets. That's how they get to your insurance policy. And so the primary question is going to be in all these, did you train properly? Did you supervise properly? And did they follow policy? As I said earlier, having a policy and not following it's just like having no policy at all. Matter of fact, it may be worse, because then you give the plaintiff's attorney something to talk about. These crashes involving these big vehicles result in horrendous settlements. Here's a $15 million one, and I'm not going to read all these to you. We're limited to an hour here, but I just want you to get a feel for what happens down the road. This is not some little minor lawsuit. These things last years. So I've got cases right now that I'm working for attorneys in cities and counties that are 7, 8, 9 years old and still going on. So your whole life gets put on hold when one of these things happen to you. And just because you weren't driving the car doesn't mean you won't be involved. As a supervisor, you're going to be held accountable. One of the things they always do is they always list a complaint in there as failure to supervise or failure to train. So, when's the last time you had some driver's training for your drivers, whether they're a sanitation worker, whether they're a fire truck driver, it doesn't matter. They need to have regular training, just like police officers and anyone else in a public situation like that. Here's a $1.4 million lawsuit on a fatal because a fire truck made a U-turn on a turnpike. Now, had all their lights on, doing everything they were supposed to do, and then we still had a wreck and a fatal, and they still lost a $1.4 million lawsuit. These things are horrendous. As you know, in Kentucky, the minimum limit of liability for a city or a county is $1 million. So that's what you're going to get sued for, most likely. Here's a fire department hit with a $3.4 million verdict for an accident. And, I could go on for days with these things. If you Google these types of things on the internet, you'll get hundreds of thousands of hits because they happen so frequently. It's $2 million here for a garbage truck rear ender. And a lot of these times, especially in today's world, a lot of it is distraction or inattention because of cell phone usage. So sort of the crux of this webinar is about policy. If you don't have policy, you need policy. If you have policy, you need to enforce policy, and you need to review policy. So how can policy help you? I use the example for police officers in the classes I teach is you're out on the golf course and you see a big storm coming up. So you're reaching your golf bag and you grab a big umbrella. You put it over your head, it rains, your feet get a little damp, maybe the bottom of your pants get a little damp, but pretty much you stay dry because you're under that umbrella. You have that decision to make, or you can make the decision to leave the umbrella in the bag and get soaking wet. That's sort of like policy. Policy is an umbrella that covers you, that helps you. Policy should be based on national standards, training standards, Kentucky state law, and individual city policies. So if you have policy and you follow policy, then you have this protection. If you have policy and don't follow policy or have no policy, then you have no protection. It's pretty cut and dry. And everybody thinks, oh, it's not going to happen to my sanitation driver. It's not going to happen to my dump truck driver. It does happen to your people. And you're going to be right in the middle of it as a supervisor when it occurs. We need to educate our people about specific vehicle characteristics. You know, as a city manager or a mayor or a city supervisor, you're dealing with a bunch of really unique vehicles sometimes, not just police cars, but a huge fire truck loaded with water that sloshes around and causes all kinds of stability issues. You're talking about a heavily loaded, top-heavy garbage truck. You're talking about maybe a salt truck that's operating on in inclement weather with a heavy load. And there are specific vehicle characteristics that you need to make your people aware of. First of all, a lot of them have limited visibility. And most of these bigger vehicles, you have no rear view mirror. You must use your side mirrors and your convex mirrors for sight distance behind you. These things have very stiff suspension, so they don't brake as well as a passenger car would brake. You have tremendous amounts of weight shift because of the loads that these vehicles carry. And they need to be aware of ABS braking. Even some of your bigger trucks now, most of your bigger trucks now have ABS braking. Have you trained your people on those? Have they had any classes on proper ABS braking? You know, the old school thought was you pump the brake, and with ABS, you just defeat ABS when you pump. You need a firm, steady brake pedal pressure to allow the computer in the car or the truck to do its job. These ABS braking systems are designed to keep the wheel from locking, so it reduces the amount of braking to each wheel via a computer, and it's done about 70 to 80 times a second. You preserve steering control when you have ABS braking, so part of your driver's training should be braking and steering around objects. These are things that you can do, and I've got at the end of the PowerPoint, I've got some little courses that you could put together, but these are things you can do with your garbage truck or your fire truck or whatever vehicle you're talking about, where you have them drive in a straight line, get to some cones, brake, and steer around the cones. Little simple things that you can do that will help these people, especially new drivers, understand the vehicle characteristics. People need to know that these vehicles can only slow down so fast. It's based on gravity and the ability of the braking system. A vehicle can only slow about 15 to 18 miles per hour per second with a full pedal application. So if you're going 60 miles an hour, it's going to take you about 4 seconds to stop. After 1 second, you'll be going 45. After 2 seconds, you'll be going 30. After 3 seconds, you're going 15. And finally, at the 4th second, you come to a stop. People know it takes a while to stop, but they don't know how far. So part of your education with your driver's training should be talking to them about stopping distances. For instance, I'll give you an example. A Dodge Charger police car going 55 miles an hour will slide or take about 126 feet to stop once a full braking application is instituted. Now, that's just braking and stopping after we have perceived a threat and done something about it. So if we're driving down the road and we see a deer in front of us on the road, it takes us about 3/4 of a second to realize there's a deer on the road. It takes us another 3/4 of a second to decide what we're going to do about it. So that's a second and a half. So at 60 miles an hour, we've gone about 135 feet. So if you had the 135 and the 126 for the for the braking, you're talking about over 250 feet. And it doesn't matter how good a driver you are. This is all based on time and distance and physics. And that's one thing you need to talk to your people about. They can win every fire truck rodeo, every sanitation truck rodeo that you send them to. They could have a whole room full of trophies, but they can't change physics. And they can't make the vehicle stop any faster than gravity and the braking systems will allow it to stop. It's very it's very informative to educate people about these things because they know it takes a while, but they don't know how far. How long it takes you to stop is not nearly as important as how far it takes you to stop. With the airbag systems that we have in cars and some small trucks now, we need to watch the thumbs. We need to keep the thumbs off the steering column, the center of the steering column. Those airbags deploy at about 200 miles an hour in 1/20th of a second. So basically, if you have your thumbs, in this picture you're seeing, if you have your thumbs over there on the center where the horn is, and that airbag deploys, that whole plastic cover blows off that at 200 miles an hour. Obviously, you don't want your thumbs there. If your thumbs get trapped in there, it tends to pull them loose from the joints, tears ligaments. Thumbs don't work well after that. So proper hand position is very important. I see a lot of people that drive around with one hand on the steering wheel. You should encourage your drivers to be professional and keep two hands on the steering wheel at all times. Number one, that eliminates any type of texting. And number two, it gives them better control of the vehicle. So we like the 9 and 3 position that you see here. Some agencies and some trainers teach 10 and 2, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on the steering wheel, which is fine. But both hands need to be on that steering wheel for extra control. Every vehicle that you send out on the road every morning should have a pre-trip inspection, whether it's a police car, a fire truck, a sanitation truck, a dump truck, a meter reader, it doesn't matter, because these are the types of things that plaintiff's attorneys will look at you for if the lawsuit develops. They'll look to see what kind of maintenance records you have. They'll look to see if you do pre-trip inspections. Now, remember that if it's a commercial vehicle, in other words, over 26,001 pounds, you're required under federal statutes to do a pre-trip inspection. Most, and I don't want to say all the time, but a lot of the time, our drivers get complacent with this. They walk around the truck, they say, okay, I've done my pre-trip, but they never do the pre-trip inspection. They don't check the tire pressure. They don't look at the air brake system. They don't look for cracked axles cracked rims or leakage on a brake pad. Things that will get you in big, big trouble if there's a wreck and the plaintiff's attorney brings in a professional mechanical expert to look at that truck. Maintenance costs cities lots of money, and I get that, but it's the best money you're going to spend. If you don't have a good maintenance program, if you don't keep good records, it will come back to haunt you if there is a wreck. We have to stress to our employees that no one knows when or if an emergency situation will occur. No one knows when you're driving that sanitation truck down the same street you've driven for 20 years and little Johnny decides to dribble a basketball out between two cars, then we have an emergency. And nobody knows when that's going to happen. So we have to keep our head on a swivel, and we have to make sure our employees know that they have to be attentive to the driving task. I suggest that you have some sort of written checkoff list, and you can get these from trucking companies. You can get them from truck stops. They have federal pre-inspection trip pieces of paper. You can develop your own. But the main thing is that you have your employees do this, you have them sign it, you have them do it daily, and you keep those records according to federal guidelines or your personal or your city guidelines. If I looked at everybody's car that's looking at this webinar today, probably 95% of you have your mirrors adjusted wrong. We tend to adjust our mirrors so they look right down the edges of our vehicle, and that way it's easy for us to back into a parking place or make a backing maneuver. And that's fine for that, and that's the way they should be for that. But most of these cars and trucks should back into a parking spot. One of the largest claims that either the League of Cities or CACO, the Association of Counties, has is backing accidents. And it's because we don't back into parking spots. We tend to pull into parking spots, and then when we leave, we don't see the person behind us. We don't see the car that pulled in behind us. We don't see the telephone pole. We don't see the garbage can or the dumpster. And so we have an accident. if you will require your employees to back into parking spots, you will reduce your backing accidents significantly. As far as mirror adjustment go, you want your mirrors pointed out at angles. So basically, I tell people, put your head on the driver window and adjust the left mirror so that only you can see the rear edge of the car. Then lean to the right with your head toward the center mirror and adjust the right side mirror to where the rear of the car is visible. That puts your mirrors out at angles so that when you make a lane change, if there's somebody in the lane you're changing into, you will see them in the mirror. Consider the installation of a convex mirror on both sides of the vehicle. Now, most of our vehicles nowadays have convex mirrors on the right side. That's that fisheye looking mirror that gives you that distorted view, but it gives you a big view, a wide view. For about $5.95, you can go to AutoZone and get a small convex mirror and put it on the upper left corner of your driver's side mirror and have a convex mirror on that side too. It will help reduce lane change accidents. It's a very small price to pay to prevent a lawsuit of $1 million. So here's a picture. You're looking out this Dodge Charger, and all you see is the very back corner of that mirror, which gives us a very wide place over to the left to see anybody in our left lane as we would change lanes to the left. Same thing with the right side. Again, you just see the very corner of the vehicle, and we have this big wide view of the right lane, or the lane to the right of us, or the shoulder, so that we would not make a lane change into somebody. This is especially important for your bigger vehicles with the big West Coast mirrors. Obviously, the center mirror, you get what you get. Most of the vehicles don't even have a rear view mirror you can see through because of the apparatus on the back of the cab of the truck or whatever. But in your cars and pickup trucks, you do have that. So that should be adjusted to where you can see out as well as possible. The key is that they back into parking spots every single time. I'll tell you how important it is. CSX Railroad had a large problem with their trucks getting in backing accidents. They have the 10,000-pound trucks that ride on the rails. They have the big cargo bays on the side of them. They have very limited view. And they instituted a requirement that every driver had to back into a parking place. In 1 year, they reduced their backing accidents by 29%. They were serious about it. If a supervisor caught an employee not backing into a parking lot or parking space, it was 2 days without pay. And obviously, it didn't take but 1 or 2 of those before the word got around. And now when you see a CSX vehicle parked somewhere, you'll notice it'll be backed in. Little simple things that don't cost you any money can save you millions and millions of dollars. This is the view that your mirrors should have, so that if anybody's in those opposing lanes or adjacent lanes to you, you're going to see them when they approach. Once they get to the B pillar, which is the place between the front door and the back door, then the driver's peripheral vision will take over. Now, they can't back into a parking spot with those mirrors adjusted like that. So if it's a big vehicle with fixed mirrors, you have to make some sort of accommodation for that and get some sort of average distance where it works both ways. But if it's a pickup truck or a passenger car, all they have to do is push a button and they can move the mirrors. And you should make that maybe part of your driver's training. You have them do a backing exercise and force them to change the mirror position. Whoever's sitting in the car with them or whoever's watching the exercise should make sure they adjust those mirrors. And then once they complete the backing exercises, they should readjust them back out to the driving mode. Obviously, if it's a fire truck, a dump truck, a sanitation truck, there's all kinds of blind spots. And a picture like this, and you're going to get a copy of all these. So a picture like this posted in the break room could be invaluable because they see it every day, even subconsciously. So at the time when they try to make these lane changes, that image will come back to them and keep them aware of the dangers of making lane changes with these vehicles with restricted rear visibility. Are all your lights working? Now I've got a police car here, but it goes the same for a fire truck or a sanitation truck or the meter reader's truck. If you have lights that are out, if you don't maintain your vehicle properly, that's something that's going to be discovered during a post crash inspection, and it will come back to haunt you. The other side will make a big deal about the fact that you're not taking care of your vehicles, that you don't have the proper headlights installed, that you have lights that aren't working, and especially with your dump trucks and your sanitation trucks, which do all kinds of backing. That's a big problem with the rear lights. Also remember that if it's a commercial vehicle, it's got to have retroreflective tape on the back of it. Now, the problem with that is we put retroreflective tape on it when it's brand new, and then 5 years later, after 5 seasons of driving that vehicle around, we've got the exact same tape still on there. And it's totally ineffective. It's old, it's torn, it's worn, it's covered with dirt. Something as simple as having your trucks clean can keep you out of a lawsuit, because that retroreflective tape is visible when it's clean. When it gets old, yeah, it costs a little money to replace them, but replace it. A lot of companies replace their retroreflective taping every 3 years. And it's a minute cost to keep from being sued for $1 million. And when we say, are your lights working, we mean all the lights, front, back, side. If there's a light on the vehicle, it needs to be working. We need to talk to our drivers about these special purpose vehicles. So, I've got an example of one here. There's a large blind spot for the driver on the right side because of that door system that's in place. And at intersections, if the driver's not aware of that, they will tend to pull out in front of someone. The vehicle's tall and top heavy. So, during cornering maneuvers, tripping is a problem. The stiffer tires make cornering more difficult, and the increased width making driving them on some of the roads that we drive on in our city streets and counties quite difficult. So educate your people about the vehicle they're driving. Every different vehicle should have some specifics designed in the training program to educate the driver. There's lots of visibility issues, and obviously human factors is one of the largest causes of our traffic collisions. It's very seldom mechanical. Our vehicles are built today to high standards. Tires are built to high standards, and so we don't have the blowouts we used to have back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. We don't have the steering issues that we had back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But human factors is still the leading cause of an accident. So the people that drive at night should have special training. Humans see terribly at night. We see best through the center part of our eye. That's called the foveal cone. And at nighttime, we use the outside part of our eye. The center part of our eye, the foveal cone, has about 160,000 things called rods in the center of them. So we get color, depth, and clarity out of that. If you hear a sound or you want to read something, what do you do with your eyes? You look straight at it. And that's where you have your clearest vision. At nighttime, we use the outside part of our eye. It's got a few things, about 10,000 of them, called rods, and they're light gathering tools for our eye. But we see in grayscale, and we don't have clarity, and we don't have depth perception. So humans, as a race, as a part of an animal kingdom, are terrible with night vision. We compensate for that with our headlights. And it's important that we keep our headlights clean. That's what we use to see to drive with at night. So if you've got a dump truck that's been on a gravel road all day or for the last 2 weeks, and then he has to go out at night to deliver some salt or for some other purpose, the truck hasn't been washed, there's a coating on those lens, and that reduces the available light that's available to hit the driver. What happens is the headlight shines out on an object, and that object, the light's reflected off of it back into the driver's eye, and that's how we see at night. So the problem at nighttime, one of the big problems, is not only dirty headlights or inoperable headlights, but the fact that we overdrive our headlights. I told you earlier, and I'm going to show you how to do this in a minute, but I told you earlier that at 60 miles an hour, it's going to take a police car about 247 to 256 feet to stop once they see an item. Well, if you look at this screen, low beams by federal regulation only shine out to 250 feet. So you've got between 2.5 feet and 0 of space that's available to you to stop. If you're running 70 miles an hour, which people do all the time on a 55-mile-per-hour road at night, and someone steps out in front of you or a deer steps out in front of you, you simply don't have the time and distance to stop. And it's important to remind these drivers that it's not about their driving ability. It's about physics and time and distance. I tell police officers all the time, anytime you can drive with your high beam headlights on at night, do that, because you get an extra 100 feet of visibility. At nighttime, we also have problems with color. Dark blue, dark brown, black, and camouflage and dark red are probably the worst colors for a human to see at night. If you think about police officers' uniforms, what color are they? Well, if it's a city police department, it's either dark blue or black. If it's a sheriff's department, it's either dark brown or black. I don't know what your city workers are wearing, but a lot of times they're dark colors, and dark colors do not shine up well at night. It takes 4 times as much light for a human to see someone in black or brown, red or camouflage than it does if they're wearing a light colored piece of clothing. So one thing you can do when you get new uniforms, you can change the color of the uniform to a lighter color. That way it requires less reflective light to be visible to oncoming traffic. And obviously, anytime you can outfit a uniform with retroreflective tape on it, you've just really exponentially increased the visibility of that worker. And I'll show you the distances here in a minute. But problems with color is a huge thing at night. Let's convert our speedometer into feet per second. Okay, so there's 60 seconds in a minute, and there's 60 minutes in an hour. That means there's 3,600 seconds in an hour, if my math is correct. Somebody can check me on that, but I think 60 times 60 is 3,600. There's 5,280 feet in a mile. So if we take 5,280 feet and divide it by 3,600 seconds, we get this number, 1.4667, which is what I use in court. You can't do the math in your head, so I tell everybody, don't use 1.4667 like I have to use in court, just round up to 1.5. It makes it easy to do the math in your head. So for example, if your sanitation truck is driving 10 miles per hour, it's driving 15 feet every second. If your meter reader is driving 40 miles an hour, he is going 60 feet every second. And if your fire truck is driving, or your ambulance is driving 60 miles an hour, they're going 90 feet every second. Remember, it takes you about 4 seconds to stop at 60 miles an hour. So if you look at the math there, that ambulance is going to go a long way before it comes to a stop. And if we educate our drivers to this, if we show them this and they know distances, it helps them be a better driver. It cuts down on following too closely. It helps them in inclement weather and various other situations. Let's talk about perception reaction time. So as I said earlier, I'm driving down the road, I see a deer. It takes me about 3/4 of a second to realize, hey, that's a deer. At 60 miles an hour, I just went 45 feet. It takes another 3/4 of a second to recognize that that deer is in my way and I need to either brake or steer or brake and steer. And so I've got another, several feet. Now, if they're highly trained drivers, your ambulance drivers, your fire truck drivers, your professional sanitation drivers, those types of people should be able to react in about 1 second. So, if they're going 60 miles an hour and after about 90 feet, they're going to start to do something with the vehicle, brake, steer, or brake and steer. Now, think about this. If the deer is less than 90 feet from you and you see it and you're going 60 miles an hour, what's going to happen? You're going to hit the deer before you ever put your foot on the brake. If you're driving down a city street at 35 miles an hour, you're going about 50 feet per second. So if it takes you 1.5 seconds to react to some kid dribbling a basketball out between 2 parked cars, you're going to go about 75 feet before you ever start to brake or steer or both. So if little Johnny's less than 75 feet from you when you see him at 35 miles an hour, you're going to hit him. Drivers need to understand this. It will make them more attentive and it will keep them more alert in the driving process. Sudden and unexpected occurrences can greatly increase perception reaction time. So if you have a new driver, he transfers in from somebody else, he moves from another city, you decide to hire him. He's lived in, let's say, Paducah his whole life, and you get him and he comes to Carroll County. Okay. In Carroll County, we have a large Amish population. They are frequently on the roads in certain parts of the county on buggies at 4 or 5 miles an hour with a horse pulling them. So that driver would need some additional training so he would be aware of that, because I'm telling you, it's happened to me before. You first time you come over top a hill and see a black buggy at night, and you're so close to it when you see it, it can get pretty unnerving. Um, Things like that would cause a much longer perception reaction time for a new driver than somebody that's been in that county for a long time and is aware of that. Also, and I'm not the sleep police or the food police, but if you go 24 hours in a row without sleeping, you have the same perception reaction time as somebody with a blood alcohol content of 0.08%. Now, for a police officer, that's a key number, because at 0.08 BAC, we take you to jail for impaired driving. So, especially your workers that do the salt and the plowing at night when there's inclement weather and they work those long shifts, just remember, if you leave them out there for 18 to 24 hours, they've got the same perception reaction times as someone who's been drinking and would be taken to jail. If people eat lots of fatty foods, okay, lots of fatty foods cause a lot of blood to go from the brain and other parts of the body to the stomach for digestive purposes. It slows our metabolism down. It makes us sleepy. You'll remember when you were a child and you went to grandma's house for dinner on Sunday, and she had fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy and the best coconut cream pie in the world, and you ate like a hyena, and it stuffed yourself, and then you all go in to sit down and watch Sunday afternoon football. What happens to everybody after about an hour? Everybody goes to sleep. It's because your metabolism has been slowed down. So I'm not the sleep police or the food police, but your drivers need to understand these things. Obviously alcohol, drugs, and those types of things can be a huge factor in perception reaction times. And unfortunately, in today's world, we have a lot of people who do partake of alcohol and still come to work, who do use methamphetamine or heroin or pills and still come to work. So having a drug testing policy in place is a pretty good idea in today's world. Also, mental state can affect perception reaction time. So if you've got an employee who's going through a divorce, financial issues, problem child, sickness or bad health in the family, that's someone you really need to watch, because their perception reaction times will not be as acute as someone who's having a normal day. Our brains are like a computer. We can only process so much information at a time. And when when other things are on our mind, the driving portion of our brain is some of it's used for other things, like thinking about the problem I'm having or trying to stay awake or those types of things. So it makes us a slower driver to perceive and respond to emergencies. And that ultimately results in wrecks sometimes. You don't have to know this. This is just giving you some examples about how long it takes somebody to stop. So I've used, would be for one of your sanitation trucks or one of your big dump trucks that's loaded with salt or sand or asphalt. At 35 miles an hour, the braking capabilities of these big trucks are not very efficient. They use an air brake system. They have, as we said earlier, really, really stiff suspension. So the brakes aren't as effective as they are on a passenger car. They're only about 60% as effective. So, in this situation here, you would see at 35 miles an hour, a driver would go about 77 feet before they put their foot on the brake. And then once they put their foot on the brake, it would take them another 97 feet to stop. So at 35 miles an hour, it's going to take them a total distance of about 174 feet to stop. That's a third of a city block. So people realize it takes their vehicle time to stop, but nobody's ever told them how far. And I think if you educate your people with these kind of numbers, it makes them a better driver. Let's look at 55 miles an hour. That same loaded dump truck, he's out on the road, he's driving exactly the speed limit, he's trying to behave and be in compliance with state law. He's going 55 miles an hour. So he goes about 121 feet before he ever gets his foot on the brake, and then he slides for another 240 feet before he stops. So his total stopping distance at 55 miles an hour is over 361 feet. It's longer than a football field. Now, most of your commercial drivers with the CDLs, they know this, but nobody's ever given them a distance. We do the same thing with police officers. At 100 miles an hour, a police car takes a total of about 600 feet to stop. It's almost 2 football fields. So when people have this knowledge, they become better drivers. part of your driver's training and part of your policy should be concerned with people not taking chances. We talk to police officers about this constantly. Why do you drive, really, really fast to a burglar alarm at a warehouse that you've been to 10 times before, and it's always a bird or a cat or somebody left the door open? It's never a real burglary. So why do we take the chance on hurting ourselves and driving that fast? Statistically, for every 10 miles an hour that you drive over the speed limit, you double your chances of being in a wreck. So if the speed limit is 55 and you've got somebody out there driving 75, they're 8 times more likely to be involved in a wreck. And when people understand these things, sometimes it gets them thinking, and sometimes it causes them to let their foot off the gas and slow down a bit. We talked about perception reaction time earlier. Let's talk about it more. This is some of the stuff that I use in court to defend you guys. This is the average perception reaction time of a human. So it's based on a study of 10,000 people and 161 studies. It's court certified. It's used all over the world. You'll notice that the average perception reaction time down there in the yellow is about 1.5 to 1.6 seconds. The scary thing is, if you look to the right of that, there's 25% of the population or 15% of the population that's slower than 2.2 seconds. Your drivers need to know that other drivers may not be as attentive as they are. We need to talk to our drivers about other drivers that are impaired, either through alcohol, drugs, other drivers that haven't had any sleep because they worked a double shift or they worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. We need to talk to our drivers about other drivers who may not be paying attention to the road because they've got other things on their mind. And so being a defensive driver is watching out for the other guy. It's an old cliche, it's an old phrase, but it's never been truer in today's world. If we talk about our headlights, the federal government requires, as I said earlier, that the headlights have to shine out to 250 feet. So if you look at the right side of the chart where the 2 cars are, you'll see where the yellow dotted line and the yellow cloud intersect is right at 250 feet. So car manufacturers don't put any additional lighting capabilities in the car that they don't have to put in. They can make lights that you could see down the road for half a mile, but of course, it'd be a problem driving because you blind everybody and nobody else could be on the road but you. So this is the sort of the solution they've come up with, is that the low beam headlights shine out to about 250 feet. Which is good, but remember, at 55 miles an hour, it takes a passenger car about 247 feet to stop. So you've only got about 2.5 feet to room to spare. If you're changing the radio station, if you're looking at your cell phone, if you look over at your passenger to talk to them, your 2.5 feet just went away and you could be involved in an accident. If we look at people wearing dark clothes, so this is the same light. This is a halogen low beam light, which is what most of your new vehicles have in them now. Somebody wearing black, blue, camouflage, those types of things. As I said earlier, it takes 4 times as much light to see them as somebody wearing something light gray, light tan, those types of colors. You'll notice that the light only shines out hot enough or illuminates enough to see somebody 120 feet in front of them. Now, that's pretty scary if you think about it. We said if you're driving at the speed limit of 55 on a 2-lane road at night or a 2-lane road in the city, you're driving at the speed limit of 55, it's going to take you 247 feet to stop. But if you look at this chart, you'll see that you couldn't even see the person wearing black or brown or camouflage until you were 120 feet from them. So obviously, there's going to be a problem there. You can't stop in time. As a matter of fact, at nighttime, your perception reaction is not 1.5 seconds, but it's normally 2. So at 55 miles an hour, you're going 80 feet per second. 2 seconds, you go 160 feet. Now you put your foot on the brake or start to turn the steering wheel. If you can't see the person until you're 120 feet from them, I think we've got a problem there. You're going to be about 60 feet past the person after you hit them before you ever start to take evasive maneuvers. And we see this with pedestrian crashes all the time. These are little things that you can teach your people, and it helps them be more aware of driving. Nighttime driving, you have to be totally focused on the driving task, totally, or you will have a wreck. We need to encourage people to wear their retro reflective vest. I think that you guys in the city are doing an awesome job across the state because most of your uniforms have retro reflective taping built into them. But you see the difference here. I'll go back to this last slide. If they're wearing black or blue, you can see them 120 feet away. If they've got their retro reflective coating material on their vest or on their clothing, you can see them about 647 feet away. Huge difference, huge difference. Even an impaired driver is going to see them in time to most likely make an evasive maneuver and avoid contact with them. So, you know, how many of your drivers are out at night, cut a tree off a subdivision road or a city street, or working on a water main, or whatever your guys are doing at night? We have workers out there at night. They need to be in retro reflective vests. If you're a police commander, chief, mayor, you know, I suggest your policy talk about wearing a retro reflective vest when you're out of the car at night, on accident scenes, roadside investigations, that type of thing. They need to understand that if they don't comply with these things, that it could affect any workers' comp benefits, and it could be in violation of OSHA standards as well. So remember, you're probably overdriving your headlights even at posted roadway speeds, especially if you're on the interstate at 70 miles an hour. The other thing is pedestrians, for some reason, they believe that if they can see the driver's headlight, that the driver can see them. And based on those slides I just showed you, you see that's nowhere near the case. There's a study by Dr. Mark Green, who's a noted vision expert for many years in the United States. And he's done some studies and found that if a pedestrian enters your path from left to right, there's a 95% chance you'll hit them if you're traveling at highway speeds. That's a huge number. And, you know, we see coon hunters go across the road at night. We see impaired people walking down the shoulder of the road because they don't have a driver's license or a car, and they're trying to get from, you know, point A to point B. We see people that have had their cars break down and just are walking down the road trying to get help. So it's very important for your people to know that at night, the chance of hitting a pedestrian is huge, huge, because of our humans' inability to see well at night. Again, the colors at night are very hard for us. We have to make sure that our people are using their seatbelts. It reduces injury. You're 17 times more likely to be injured in a crash if you don't have a seatbelt on. That is something that, in my opinion, you should be very strict on. If you catch people not wearing a seatbelt, maybe warn them once, maybe write them up. About the third time, they need to probably have some vacation time that's not paid for. You have to do that. There has to be penalties for noncompliance. If it isn't, there's no incentive for them to comply. About 55% of police officers, and most of them are city officers, don't wear their seatbelts. And obviously they're hurting wrecks, and obviously there's punitive damages and penalties for them when that happens. And we're trying to get that number up, but you've got sanitation workers and other drivers in your departments that don't wear their seatbelts either. And it's something you really need to be aware of and really strict on. Drivers need to be aware that in today's vehicles, there's all kinds of electronic devices that can tell us things about the wreck. For this instance, this is a Mercury Mountaineer. You'll see the black line there is the vehicle speed. So that the person's traveling about 20 seconds before the wreck, they're going about 43 miles an hour. The blue and red lines are their braking systems. So you see they get on the brakes. They're in heavy traffic. They're on the Waterston Expressway, rush hour, stop and go stuff. And then they get on their cell phone. Now, I know this is my daughter's wreck, so this is why I know this happened. After her dad told her not to be on the phone, she's on the phone. This is when she was in college. So anyway, she's driving around talking to one of her girlfriends on the phone, traffic stops. She doesn't see it in time. Then she hits her brakes. You'll see over here where the last braking application is over about 3 seconds before zero, and or 2 seconds before zero, and you'll see the speed plummet from 40 miles an hour down to zero. That's when she rear-ended somebody. These are types of things that we can get off the black boxes in cars. They're on all the cars now. It's a federal law, and even your big trucks have what's called ECMs, which are electronic control modules, which, depending on the model of the truck, can give us braking data and speed data for up to a minute before the wreck. So there's a lot of things out there that can help us look at why a crash happened. And if your vehicle is involved in a crash, I'd get one of your accident reconstructions or somebody from KCO or KLC to come download the box, look at it, and try to figure out why this wreck happened so that it doesn't happen to somebody else. Here's a distinct example. This is a Chevrolet. You can see that the driver's belt status was unbuckled. So we know that. So now we've got an OSHA issue. We've got a workers' comp issue. We've got a policy violation. You see the speeds up to 5 seconds before the crash, the percentage of throttle. If you show these types of things to your people and they know what's on those boxes, it'll make them a better driver because they know you're going to know. They say, oh, I was going 35 miles an hour, and you download the black box, they were going 56 and a 35, there's a problem. What's the right tire pressure? These new vehicles have all kinds of electronic abilities to measure things in our cars. And one of the things you can do is push a button and tell how much air is in your tire. That's really, really important. And those tire pressures need to be checked daily, especially in the big commercial vehicles. You put between 90 and 105 pounds in those tires, they need to be checked. You can't tell if they're 30 or 40 pounds low by looking at them. And it's the same way with the radio tires. You cannot tell without looking at them. So get your people in a habit of looking at those tire pressures daily. We need to put the amount of tire pressure, the proper tire pressure in a tire. And we find that information usually on the B pillar or the driver's side door. It's this sticker you're looking at right here, red, yellow, and white. And it tells you what the tire pressure should be for the size tire that comes on that vehicle. So two things here. Number one, make sure you always replace the tires with the original equipment manufacturer's stated size, and make sure that the cold air inflation is what the sticker says, not what somebody says, I'll put 20 pounds less in there because it rides better, put 5 pounds more in there because it pulls better. No, put your tire pressure based on what the federal government has said to put on there. If not, you're going to have yourself a problem when there's a wreck and an inspector comes in and looks at the tires. Are you using the right kind of tires? This is a big problem with some police agencies. We tend to buy cheap tires. We go through tires, so many tires, we tend to buy cheap tires. These tires on some of these vehicles should be rated for the specific vehicle. For instance, if you look at this tire, it's a P225 60 R18, and at the end it says 99W. That's a speed rated tire. That tire is specifically made for a police vehicle or something that drives fast. Your first responder, fire battalion chief in his car or whatever. Guys that have to drive above the speed limit. Don't make the mistake of putting some cheap tire on that car and then it fail at high speeds, because then you're in a lawsuit not only with whoever he hit, but him, because you haven't put the right tire on there and you don't have a leg to stand on. Most of these speed rated tires are on state price contracts, so they're relatively inexpensive as compared to what you would get off the street on another tire. This chart here will show you, based on what type of vehicle you have, the speed rating for the tire. And again, you see down at the very bottom, 88W or 99Y, those W and Ys are high-speed tires. Do you have the right kind of tires on your ambulance? Do you have the right kind of tires on an F-250 pickup that has a little salt carrier in the back and a plow in the front of it? Make sure your tires match your vehicle. Tire inflation is vital. And I would give everybody a copy of this slide. They can take it home, because if you look at your tire pressure. If you've got 35 pounds of air in your tire, it's the fifth number down on the left in the first column, and look across to the right column, you are in a potential hydroplane situation at speeds above 60 miles an hour. So if you're out on the interstate driving the speed limit of 70 and it's raining and you have 35 pounds of air in your tire, you have the potential to be in a hydroplane situation. People don't understand this. They don't know that. Now, if you look at the very bottom, if you're talking about a commercial vehicle tire that's got 95 or 100 pounds of pressure in it, the chances of a hydroplane are almost nil. But on our passenger cars and trucks, it is a problem, which is why tire inflation is so vital. Note on the side of the tire the things that are important to you. One of the big things is when the tire was made. And if you look at the U.S. tire identification number, I've got it pointed out there, it'll tell you, it's got 2 numbers on there that'll tell you when the tire was made. Don't put old tires on vehicles. If they're over 2 years old, don't put them on your vehicles. That's a big no-no. Let's say there's a wreck. We need some good photographs. So these red triangles that I have on this particular intersection show that the camera operator is far enough away from the scene to capture the entire scene. If a reconstructionist is going to come in to help you with your wreck during a lawsuit, we've got to be able to come up with good speeds, and we do that sometimes with the length of the tire marks. Many times we don't get called for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 months. In some cases, 2 or 3 or 4 years. And so the evidence is gone, and we're not magicians. We just can't wave a magic wand. We need that photographic evidence. You should treat every county or city vehicle wreck as a very serious thing. I can't tell you how many times I've been involved testifying in lawsuits where it was a non-injury accident. Nobody took any pictures, nobody took any measurements, nobody kept the vehicles, they repaired them, and then there's a big lawsuit, and we've got no evidence. Here's a great picture. Obviously, this guy had his seatbelt on. With seatbelts, when the airbag deploys, there's at the very bottom of the B pillar there's a charge that goes off and actually causes the seatbelt to retract about 6 inches. So the seatbelt holds you in place against the seat, and then the airbag slows you down, and it prevents internal injuries. Once that happens, that seatbelt becomes inoperable. So if you see a seatbelt extended like this, you know they had their seatbelt on. If the seatbelt is retracted back into the B pillar and you can't pull on it, it's tight as a violin string, I don't care what they told you, they didn't have their seatbelt on. A picture of this light switch, that's worth $1 million. They said your driver didn't have his lights on, and we show this picture where, hey, anytime the vehicle's turned on, the lights come on. You know, that picture right there can save us $1 million in a lawsuit. There's things called hot shock that we look at, so we know if the light bulb is on. You can look at the left side of the filament there. You see the big U in it. When these things get hot, they get very molten almost. They almost melt. And so when there's a big crash, all that energy distorts the filament, so we can tell if the bulbs are on. I've got a couple other examples here to show you. Here's one right here. You can see the bottom filament is actually unsprung. It's uncoiled. The top one is just broken. So the top one's cold shock. The bottom one is hot shock. So the bottom filament was operational at the time of the wreck. The top one wasn't. I put these things in here for you. Some little simple steering exercises. They're not hard on your vehicles. They're not hard on your parking lots or anything. You can do these at low speeds, but it gives you a gauge as to the capabilities of your driver. If you've got somebody that can't drive through some cones like this, either forward or reverse with the fire truck or a dump truck or a pickup truck, then you probably need to send them to some remedial training. These things are low speed. You can set them up in one of your city lots, and at least you have shown that you have done some driver's training. So we have a steering exercise here. We have a parallel parking exercise. And I say have them parallel park left and right because we have one-way streets in our towns. And then finally, here's a forward reverse exercise. So we're having them back into some driveways and pull out. And these are simple things to do. You can do them at low speeds, and yet they really make a difference. If there is a wreck, debrief and debrief with everybody. When we have a wreck, we need to talk about that wreck at the next meeting, not to make that driver embarrassed or whatever, but we need to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to another driver. And we always want to stress precision over speed. And we always want to talk about, being a professional. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, I've enjoyed being a presenter to you today. It looks like I have a question here. It says, do many cities have a policy in place for officers to wear their retroreflective vest on a traffic stop at night? And the answer is you should. Thing about police officers wear black, blue, or brown, all of which are terrible at night to see. And most departments now are implementing policy that says you must wear a retroreflective vest on the scene of an accident, or if you're outside on the side of the road for an extended period of time.
Thank you, Rob. It looks like someone else has their hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and ask them to unmute.
Can you hear me, Rob?
Yes, I can.
Great job as usual. Could you talk about for the cities the need to have vehicles that are certified for law enforcement? We have a lot of questions recently about cities asking about, do they have to be certified for law enforcement use? And that's a big issue for us. So could you discuss that? And also tires, the change of tires, you mentioned that, but that's a big issue too that we see that as far as when to change the tires.
Okay, sure. The quick answer on the tires is never let them get below 230 seconds because then the wear bar is showing and they're worn out. But you're better off to change them at 3 to 430 seconds. And it's not going to be but about 4,000 or 5,000 miles difference in the usage of the tire. These tires are soft and they wear out fairly quickly, but you cut down your hydroplane risk and you help you with your stability on the roads and cornering if you have more tread on the tire. So being chinchy on tires is not a good thing. It'll cost you money in the long run. The other question was the type of police vehicles. My recommendation to you is do not buy a cheap civilian model car for a police agency. For instance, you can buy a Dodge Charger, but you need to buy the police package Dodge Charger. You can buy a Tahoe, but they also make a police pursuit Tahoe. They're two totally different vehicles. They may look the same on the outside. And I'll give you an example, a Ford Explorer. You can buy a Ford Explorer civilian version, or you can buy a Ford Explorer police pursuit version. They're not even made in the same plant. They have the Explorer police version has a cage built around the rear gas tank. The shocks are stiffer. It has additional suspension. It has a different wiring harness. It has a different amperage alternator. There's all kinds of things that are done. And if you try to save a couple $1,000s by buying the civilian version, you open yourself up to a huge lawsuit. And we could all look at the Louisville Metro detective that was killed a couple of years ago by the sanitation truck under the bridge there at the Muhammad Ali Center. And she was driving a civilian version Ford. And but it had red lights and blue lights and a siren, so it was considered a police vehicle. And there was a huge civil lawsuit from the family to the city of Louisville on using that particular type of vehicle. There's some things you can save money on, and there's some things you can't. And your vehicles and your maintenance and your policy are things you should never scrimp on.
So you would recommend, even for administrative car duties, like people that are, that not patrolling, but administrative staff members, to still have police packages?
If they're going to ever use that vehicle in a pursuit mode, yes. Now, if you've got, say that it's a chief of police and he never goes on a call, he never turns his lights on, he never turns his siren on, and he never drives over the speed limit, then he's probably okay. But how many of us can say that will never happen? I mean, even if you're the chief of a big department, sometimes there may be an occasion where you have to take action as an officer, or you may have to get somewhere quick. And so once you turn that vehicle into an emergency vehicle, it needs to be equipped for one, and not just lights and siren, but also the way the vehicle's built.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions? Let's see.
There is one more question on here, Greg.
Okay, go ahead.
Would you talk about employees driving while taking prescribed medications?
Would I talk about what?
Employees driving while taking prescribed medications.
Oh, well, I'm not an attorney or a doctor, either one, but I can tell you that presents problems because if they're taking prescribed medication that says on the bottle, this may affect your driving ability or something, unless they've got a doctor's order that says that's okay, then I probably wouldn't let them drive. Your manager's not a doctor, your city mayor's not a doctor. If you can get some doctor to actually say it's okay, then I guess that puts the ball in his court, but I'd be real careful about that. There's a lot of medications out there that can affect one's perception and reaction time. And obviously all medical records are going to be subject to discovery in a lawsuit. So they're going to know what he had in his system or what she had in her system at the hospital based on the blood draws. And I'd be very, very careful with that.
And that's also something you typically see in a vehicle use policy. It'll address those types of situations as well. We can help you with that with our legal department and give you a model policy if needed that would address that situation.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say.
All right. Well, if you want to hear more from Rob, he is going to be presenting at our Risk and Safety Conference in March, which will be in Owensboro. It's March 9th through the 11th. We look forward to that as well. So we invite everybody to attend. If there's no further questions, Rob, again, appreciate you so much for sharing the information. As Mark said, good job as always. And we look forward to seeing you soon, sir. And thank you all for attending today's H.E.L.P. webinar.